5 years ago, Brandon Stanton was fired from his job as a bonds trader because he took too many risks. He likes pushing boundaries, and that does not work so well in trading. But taking risks is what landed him in the position he's in today, a bit of an internet phenomenon. Brandon is the founder of Humans of New York. And with no fully formed plan, he hit the streets of New York and just started taking pictures of people. And the idea for Humans evolved naturally out of what he was doing every day. And from the comfort level he established with the people whose stories he tells after he takes their pictures. He says, great things happen sometimes when you don't have a plan. Today, he has over 15 million followers on Facebook, about 4 million followers on Instagram last time I checked, and a #1 New York Times best-selling book, and another book out this fall. I'm excited to welcome Brandon Stanton to the MAX stage to share his journey and some stories that will no doubt strike a chord with all of us. So, Brandon Stanton.
Hi, everyone. So I've become somewhat known for approaching people on the streets of New York one at a time. I've done that about 10,000 times, which is a much different experience than speaking to 10,000 people at one time. I'm sure individually you guys are all wonderful people, but as a mass you were just terrifying. So the common theme in dress rehearsal was I need to project, so we're going to work on that too. I'm not sure how many of you follow Humans of New York. Sometimes when I give speeches, it's just me. Oh, thank you. Thanks. So for those of you who might not know what it is, basically what I do is I just walk through the streets of New York City all day long, and I just kind of stop random people on the streets, and I ask for their photograph, and then I do an interview with them, and I try to learn their story. And then that night on my blog, I try to share about 3 or 4 of these stories in the best way that I possibly can. And an audience of about 15 million people have emerged that follow this work every single day. The story kind of starts 5 years ago, though, when I was working as a bond trader in Chicago. And things were not going well at all. Things started to go very, very badly. And I knew that I was probably going to lose my job. And so much of my thoughts and so much of my energy went into keeping this job. Because I was a history major at a public university, and suddenly I stumbled into this wonderful job where I had an opportunity to make lots of money, and I just didn't want to mess that up. I just didn't want to mess it up, and it just wasn't going well. And so I just spent all day long thinking about the markets. How am I going to keep this job? How am I going to turn things around? And I was so deathly afraid of getting fired. And then one day it happened, and I lost my job. And it was very unexpectedly a good day. Because suddenly, seriously, for 2 years of my life, 100% of my thoughts had been directed towards trying to keep this job where I sat at a computer and traded fixed relative value trading and fixed income securities. It was something so specific that I couldn't even tell my friends about it. And all my thoughts were going into how to keep this job. And then I lost it. And I remember taking a walk, it was in Chicago, and realizing, you know what, all of those thoughts that I've been putting towards that, I can put towards whatever I want. I can do whatever I want to do now. I can think about anything that I want to think about. And I thought about that, and I said to myself, you know, the past 2 years, I've spent all my time thinking about money. And like all of you, I was a creative person. I viewed myself as somewhat of an artist, and I kind of had this narrative that a lot of you might have too, which is I'm going to make my money first. I'm going to get my security first, and then I'm going to do what I want to do. Maybe I can use some of this money to make a film or be a photographer or something like that, and that was my mindset. And so I spent the last 2 years thinking about nothing but money, and I had nothing to show for it. I lost my job, and all I'd lost is 2 years of my time. And so at that moment, I made the commitment to myself that for the next foreseeable future, and I don't know how long that's going to be, I'm going to view my life as I'm going to do whatever I can to spend my time how I want to spend it. And my goal is to make just enough money to where I own my time. And when I thought about what I wanted to do, I thought of something that I'd only been doing for a few months. Because when my job started going very poorly, I needed something. I told you, all I thought about was that job all day long. I needed something to create a little space in my mind that didn't have anything to do with markets or my job. And so I bought a camera. And I would walk downtown Chicago every single day after work or on the weekends when I wasn't working, and I would just photograph whatever I saw. And these are some of my early photographs. I don't know what I was going for here. I think some sort of metaphor about the futility of passing time. I don't know. That one's kind of cool. I would just take thousands of photos every day just because I loved it. Had nothing to do with accomplishment or money or success. I just loved taking photos. And this one has a special moment in my heart because I told you guys I lost my job and I had no money, but I decided I wanted to be a photographer. And so what I did is I called all my friends who still had jobs, and I knew they had money. And I sold them some of these photos that I had taken. It was the hardest phone calls because I had the idea to do Humans of New York, but I needed the money to move to New York City. And so I called my friends and sold them these photos. I sold my friend Andy that one for $300. Oh, man. Somebody asked me in an interview last week, what was the most pivotal moment of your life? And I thought about it, because when people ask me questions, I want to give them like really good answers, because that's what I do for a living. I was like, and so when a college student or something turns it around on me and asks some questions, I really think about it. And somebody asked me what the most pivotal moment of my life was, and I said, well, I know it has to do something with Humans of New York, because Humans of New York has become such a huge, life-changing everything for me. And I thought, so it's probably whatever happened that shoved me most down the path that eventually became Humans of New York. And this is what I thought of. This is the first photo of a person that I ever took. And I'd only been photographing for a few months at this point, and I was in a subway car in Chicago, and I saw these kids. These kids don't even know each other, but they were looking up and they were making the exact same face looking at something. And I remember thinking, that's really beautiful, but I was so nervous. I've approached 10,000 people on the streets now in 20 different countries. I will approach anybody, but I had to remind myself how terrified I was to take this first photo, because is it okay to photograph a stranger? Kids, But I got up my courage and I kind of pulled up my camera, and you can see the mom's face in the background. She kind of busted me. And I took the photo, and I remember looking in the viewfinder, and I remember feeling such a sense of accomplishment. Because even though I'd only been photographing for a couple months, only 2 months, I had taken a photo that someone who had been photographing for 20 years and knew everything about the camera might not be able to take, because I'd gotten over that fear. And I took that picture of a person. And I remember feeling so fulfilled. And that feeling of getting over the fear and breaking that wall between me and a stranger, and feeling like that's something that I can do, and that's something that I can be good at, that maybe not a lot of other people can be good at, and the feeling of fulfillment once I did that, that was the gasoline. That was the fuel, replicated thousands and thousands and thousands of times, that made me move to New York City with 2 suitcases and no money to chase this crazy dream of photographing 10,000 people on the streets of New York. And for those of you who follow my blog, you know that like almost every photo has thousands and thousands of comments, and some of them have millions of likes. And I think it's very touching that the very first photo I ever posted has 0 likes. And one comment from somebody who was on my community college quiz bowl team, and it says, "Racial harmony, I like it." So this was the first idea. And you know, if there's, as creative people, if there's one theme that I always try to talk to college kids about and things like that, is that if I had ever waited, the Humans of New York that eventually became famous is a storytelling blog. It's all about telling the stories of people. But the Humans of New York that I decided to dedicate my life to and risk everything on looked nothing like that. I always say that if I had waited until I had the idea for Humans of New York before giving my life to Humans of New York, I would have never started. If I had waited for the perfect idea, I never would have started. So I always say you can't wait for perfect, because all I knew was that I love photography, and I had the idea to photograph 10,000 people on the streets of New York, and that's what got me to New York City, to where I could develop the rest of my idea. And so you can see that this is how it all started. I would just walk through the streets of New York all day long, taking about 40 or 50 portraits a day. The portraits that I first took looked something like this. Look at that. I love that picture. And I was even like, and I could never do this. Humans of New York is way too big to do this today. But I had like 10 followers back then. So I got really drunk with my friend one night, and I Adobe Photoshopped their faces on each other. There are just little moments that I was looking for first. I wasn't even talking to people or approaching people at this time. And this was really another one of the pivotal moments that kind of turned Humans of New York into what eventually became. I was still doing nothing but photography at that time. I think I had a few thousand followers on Facebook. And I remember I took a photo of this woman, and I didn't even think it was that great of a photo. But I brought it home, and the next day I was sick, so I couldn't go out and photograph, and I had nothing to put on the blog. And I remembered that this woman had said something to me. She said that every day I used to be a different color, but then one day I was green, and that was a good day. So I've been green for 15 years now. And I just had that photo, and I remember thinking, well, I don't think the photo is that great, but she said that quote to me. And so I'll just put that with the picture, and I put the quote over the picture and shared it with my few thousand Facebook fans. And to my surprise, it was the most engaged with photo I've ever had, which was probably like 67 likes at that time. And I realized, and it made so much sense at that point, because what sent me on this journey in the first place? Was it photography, or was it getting over that little fear of approaching people and realizing that I could do something different if I was willing to get over that fear and approach random people? And so it suddenly realized that that's the natural evolution of this, is that now that I've already approached these people, why not find out a little bit about who they are? And so this was the first moment that started, and from that moment on, Humans of New York has become my journey and my effort to stop random people in the street and in the best way possible tell a story about them that gives a peek into their life. And this is what the blog looks like today, and this is what the content looks like today. And what I do when I approach somebody on the street, and this has evolved along, with the blog, even in the past few years, even in the past 6 months, the time that I've spent with people has gone from about 5 to 10 minutes to often 30 to 45 minutes. And what I am doing every time I stop somebody on the street and I take their photograph is I'm trying to learn something about that person that none of the other 10,000 people that I've talked to have told me. Something that makes that person unique. And I found that that's almost never an opinion, and it's almost never a philosophy. Because we all share similar opinions, we all share similar philosophies. There's a lot of overlap there. But all of our stories are very individually unique. So when I photograph someone, I will ask them what seems like, and this is one of the amazing things that I've learned, is that I went from being terrified to approaching strangers to now almost expecting that within 10 minutes of meeting a stranger, I'm going to be talking with them about things that they haven't told anybody, including their wives or including their best friends. And the way that conversation starts with me asking what seems like some extremely candid and inappropriate questions right off the bat. What was the saddest moment of your life? What's your biggest weakness? What do you feel most guilty about? What's your biggest fear? Can you remember the time you felt most afraid? What was the happiest moment of your life? And you'll notice all the questions I ask tend to have something to do with a very strong emotion, because I found that the pivotal stories in our lives, the ones that are filled with the most drama or comedy or tragedy, are normally coupled with a very strong emotion, whether that be fear or sadness or happiness. And so when I ask those questions, do I really care about the ultimatums? Do I really care what the absolute saddest moment of someone's life is? No. I'm looking for a story that is coupled with that emotion. And almost always, if I go through all the emotions, people won't be able to think of answers to all of them, but I will almost always strike on a story where somebody, will say, oh, I can't think of an answer, I can't think of an answer, I can't think of an answer to that one. Then you'll ask them one question, well, what was the moment you felt most afraid? And you can kind of see it, and you can see that there's a story down there. And they will say, well, one time, my father got really drunk and, came home and really scared the family. And then assuming that they're willing to share and assuming that they're willing to talk about it, then I will start to ask questions just as if I was a journalist and I was treating them as a politician or Kanye West or Kim Kardashian. And that's one thing that I found, that given any person on the street, if you listen to them with the same curiosity and the same attentiveness and the same compassion that we give to famous people, celebrities, and politicians, if you give their story the same amount of attention that you give to famous people, you can portray their story in a way that will captivate 20 million people every single night, just like famous people. But we don't tend to do that. We don't tend to give that much validation to the story of the average person. And so I'll spend about 30 minutes with them. I'll say, what exactly did your mother say? How did that make you feel? What kind of face did she make? And when she did that, how did you feel? And what exactly did your father say? And I'll ask these very detailed questions and take these notes so that I can portray this story exactly as it happened. And I will share it on my blog. In this same format, I treat everybody the same. I've brought this same format all around the world, to Pakistan. And this is a great story. I don't know how much you guys follow Humans of New York, but one of the things that I haven't really had time to talk about is the community that follows Humans of New York is 15 million of the most warm-hearted people in the entire world. I mean, it's the greatest comment section on the internet. We don't make fun of people. We don't judge people. And I always say that it's because if mean people come to Humans of New York, they just get bored. They just get bored because we're not making fun of people, and they leave. And all that's left is the most warm-hearted people. We've raised over $5 million for charity in the past 6 months. And thank you. This is a great example. This is in rural Pakistan. And when I say rural Pakistan, you had to cross a lake that had submerged a village because of a falling glacier. You had to cross that by putting your car on a wooden raft and going across to the other side. That's how rural Pakistan. And we came across this man coming up towards me in a tractor. And he started crying, and he told me that he had saved up his entire life to buy a tractor. but he had knocked it over, he had tipped it over, broken the tractor, had accrued huge medical bills, and now not only did he have a tractor, he was in debt because he had to rent another tractor now. He still had to pay off his old tractor, and he didn't have enough money for his medical bills. All I did was tell that story on Humans of New York, and in the comments section, they crowdfunded the money to buy this man a new tractor. So he now has a new tractor. That's Jerusalem. That is the Tibetan community in northern India, Dharamsala. That's Uganda. Oh, just real quick, this is such a beautiful story. I actually just got back from a trip interviewing Syrian refugees. This was one of the first times that I interviewed refugees in Iraq last year. This was right after Mount Sinjar got taken by ISIS and all the Yazidis were fleeing. And I happened to be there at that time, and I was going into one of the places that they were all settling, and I saw these 3 kids, and they were putting together this, I don't know, they just had a bunch of what looked like, I don't know, trinkets to me. And I asked them what they were doing, and they said that we were building a car. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so good. They're using their imagination. This situation could not be more horrible. You know, their parents are crying. Their family members are trapped on Mount Sinjar, surrounded by ISIS. It's a horrible situation, and these kids have found this little moment to be children. And I thought, that's so great. And I kind of walked away. And then I came back, and those kids had actually taken those wires, attached them to the cam, threaded it through that crate, and made an actual wheeling car out of it. And I just remember being so impressed by that. After we raised $1.6 million for a public school in Brooklyn, me, the principal, and the young man that I interviewed was invited to the White House to interview the president. And I wanted to, and I asked him the same questions that I ask everybody else. And I wanted to, end this by bringing it from this picture. This has all happened in 5 years. 5 years. I had never even picked up a camera 5 years ago. The book's been on the bestseller list for 50 weeks. 20 million people follow this on social media. I was able to interview the president. And all started 5 years ago with that. Just because, thank you. And it's all because that I was able to get over that fear of doing something new, trusting that I could do something different, trusting that even though I'd only photographed for a few weeks, I can figure this out. I have something to offer this world. My parents think I'm crazy. My friends think I'm crazy. I have no money. I have no experience. But you know what? I did this thing that I was scared to do, and I created something that's kind of new. And if I can do that thousands of more times, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to become who I need to be along the way, and I'm going to figure out how to do what I love. And I encourage all of you to do the same thing. Thank you.